Hello and welcome to the Ontic Connected Intelligence Podcast. I'm Chuck Randolph, Ontic's Chief Security Officer. Join us as we delve into valuable insights and practical advice that will empower you to navigate the complexities of modern corporate security and risk. We're here to share knowledge from experienced leaders and innovators in the field. All right, get settled and let's dive in. Hi, Happy New Year, and welcome to the Ontic Connected Intelligence Podcast. I'm Chuck Randolph. With me is the Cindy Marble and Fred Burton. Welcome. Happy New Year, gang.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Chuck. Good to see you.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like we just saw each other yesterday.
I think we did.
As usual with a Roundtable podcast, we have no guests. We just have our own internal onticians, as we call ourselves, and subject matter experts to kind of talk about the news, bring up the roundtable, and why don't we just go right into it? It's like happy 2025. To me, it looks a lot like 2024. That looked a lot like 2023. Thoughts?
It's all the same. Just another day.
It is indeed. Honestly, I mean the end of the year was pretty tumultuous. We had quite a few events. I mean, look, we've all been at this a long time. I honestly can't remember a holiday or a holiday season where something hasn't happened. And sometimes I think a lot of protectors and a lot of risk folks in the world kind of look around and look at the holiday and go, well, what fresh hell is this that's going to erupt over the holiday season?
Yeah, no doubt. We've lived through a few bad ones.
Well, and as we record this, not to date it, but as we record it, I mean, we're looking at massive wildfires out in California again. I mean, we saw this last year. Rain, weather, man-made or natural. The risks and the activities keep happening. I mean, Fred, I know you're one that watches weather. You're not because you want to know what's it like outside, but I know given your past, supply chain issues and all that from previous companies and things you've done. I mean, what are your thoughts on the wildfires, and what are your thoughts in general on kind of managing those types of risks?
Chuck, it's a great question because I think it's one of those issues that it never matters until it does. And then once it starts to matter, it really matters well, meaning it affects everybody. And quite frankly, I know that it's the only thing that I've actually see shut down companies and production and so forth, whether it be wildfires or tornadoes. And also think it's an underestimated kind of problem when individuals are doing threat assessments to understand your geography and your footprint. I know, yeah, Chuck, Austin, Texas is the second largest high threat area for wildfires in the nation next to California. And I know we suffered horrendous fires in Bastrop, Texas, where a lot of high tech industry is moving and so forth. And I know I have read a lot of threat assessments in the past, to include even advanced reports, Sydney, on protection details where weather is really just not even covered at times. So, I do think it's one of these issues that goes literally under the radar until it's important.
I mean, Cindy, let me ask you a question. I mean, that's a good point about weather. It's always just kind of a line on the threat report, that you're briefing out to the team. I mean, how in your past experience, both in government and helping out in the private sector, do you agree with that statement? And should it just be a line item, or should we think about it more deeply?
Well, I think it is thought about more deeply in my old world. In the government experience, there's actually a team of people that are looking at all aspects of security, and weather being one of them. And there were folks that stayed on top of and made weather calls. Hey, are we flying? Are we driving? Are we heloing? What are we doing? And very cognizant and aware of the weather being an issue. I can't tell you how many, we used to call them the disaster tours, that we went on that were post weather events, but still things that were going on in areas that we had to be fully aware of and be able to react to. I think what it speaks to is anticipating all types of events, whether like you said, whether they're natural or they're man-made. We talk about 360 degrees of protection. That's part of it. It's up what's up above and down below as well as all around you. So it's something that needs to be anticipated.
That's true. I think the reason maybe sometimes it gets I mean, if we work for a large retail chain, we probably live and breathe the weather. I know some teams and even some of our own clients that have meteorologists on staff because they need to understand, and then others like weather. That doesn't affect us or our personnel. But I was thinking about the wildfires this morning when I woke up and how many people are being displaced, but then how that weather could be used, in terms of creating a narrative around a corporation or creating a narrative or mis and disinformation around activities. I mean, you're absolutely right. I think there's a 360 view, and we always have to stop and ask ourselves what's happening, how does it affect us, and what are like second and third orders of effect from we can't take off in the helo to people are saying that our office is shut down when in fact it's not. I mean, anything to pile onto that.
Yeah, I think too, Chuck. And, I've been in GSOCs where weather is the only thing that's up and running. And I think to your point, those clients that depend heavily on a supply chain, have a global footprint, even watching, the shipments coming in from the port of Houston or the port of Long Beach. And, we all lived through the horrific events in Katrina, for example, when, the fears of the Mississippi flooding would have drastically displaced the supply chain for our country and so forth. So, and it did a pretty hard hit on America's supply chain to begin with. So, it is one of those issues that it's important for all of us to remind ourselves to think about from a contingency perspective. I was thinking, Chuck, today about, we all know we have protection teams out on the West Coast with ultra high net worth protectees and so forth. And you wonder, how quickly were they able to evacuate? You have traffic, especially in the private sector where you can't have a police lead to get you out, right? So, did they have enough time to get out? Where did they go? Where was their rendezvous point and so forth? And, could they get their planes up and in the air?
Interesting today, this morning, when I got back from the gym, I was listening to the radio and they were talking about people who were abandoning their cars to evacuate because police were coming out saying, "Look, get out of your car, move out," and they were going to bulldoze the cars off the freeway so they could get emergency services vehicles in. I think you're absolutely right. There's uh, no one is coming. It's up to us. And I think there's a seasonality to these things. I was just also thinking we're on what is it, 20-year anniversary of the tsunami in Thailand. And there's a seasonality to some of these things that maybe, Cindy, back to your point, this 360 degrees also is 365 days. What are we entering into and how do we need to think about that? There should be no black swan if it's already happened, I guess is what I'm saying.
I think one of the things is taking this opportunity, especially, the situation's happening. So, now's not the time to say, okay, how are we going to, plan one of these events, but using this as an after action opportunity to really sit down and game plan these things and to run tabletop scenarios. I mean, that was one of the things that we did all the time, and organizations should do that. Run a tabletop. What are we going to do? What happens if all the roads are blocked and we can't get in because people have abandoned their vehicles? What happens if this? We know, like you said, there's a seasonality. I mean, I live here on the Gulf Coast. We're always, hurricane season is approaching. This is how you prepare for it. And, everybody does it, or they should.
Yeah.
And the devastation, Chuck and Cindy, I was looking at some of the video. I'm very familiar with that area just for some business trips I've made out there, and specifically on the Pacific Coast Highway there in Malibu. And if you look at the footage there, literally every ultra high net worth house you can imagine with big time Hollywood personalities, it has been burnt to the ground. It's somewhat unbelievable when you look at the footage.
Yeah. It's eerie. It's eerie to watch. And, our hearts and our thoughts go out to everyone affected by it. And we hope this finds everybody safe. Um, I don't want to forget, what we went through at the end of the year and the tragic assassination of the United Healthcare CEO. And while that seems to be kind of uh, it's kind of enveloped by other news, if you will, that have happened. We've had New Orleans, we've had the tragic incident in Vegas, we've had now these wildfires, and there were still this assassination still happened. People are still reeling. Organizations are still saying, "What about us? Could it happen here?" I mean, I'm curious. We've had a few minutes since the issue. How are each of you thinking about it? What are you hearing, and how are you advising people to utilize the incident to the best way in terms of ensuring that we're having the right conversations and we're going to make sure this isn't repeated?
One one of the things I talk about and I think we've always talked about is the reason to collaborate and to talk and to have conversations. This isn't just an executive protection problem. Executive protection is responsible, obviously, but it is really a team effort of an entire security apparatus to work around, provide the protective intelligence that's needed, and to support the executive protection teams as they carry out their job, and to work to ensure that these tragic events don't happen. This is truly uh, a tragedy in the corporate world, and I think just across the world in general, that there could be such a targeted act like this, just on the street in New York City.
Yeah, Fred, I've heard you talk about, the almost raising the assassin up to like folk hero status, if you will, in certain dark sectors of the internet and in conversations. I mean, what are you seeing or what are you hearing in terms of you know not knockoffs, but rising tides of maybe vitriol against haves and have-nots and all those things?
Yeah, I do think it's a troubling issue just from a historical perspective, and I think the shooter, that kind of threat actor, is what I believe to be the new jackal or part of the new jackals. Meaning, if you go back in time and you look at the first Carlos the Jackal who tried to assassinate the CEO of Marks and Spencer there in London, and that was kind of a bungled operation, but he certainly tried. And then you had the Harryhausen hit, which we've all studied and learned from with a protection team. And now you've got these new jackals that are, you know, anti-rich, anti-CEO, anti-healthcare, whatever they might have an anti beef about. And I think it's important for us to understand, who else is being targeted. We have our internal protective intelligence blog that we manage here at Ontic, and there's still a fair amount of confusion as to exactly who has been listed where and when and so forth. I think we still have a lot of intelligence gaps on that. And I'm not overly optimistic that the FBI or the Secret Service or anybody's collating that kind of data unless it specifically impacts them. So I get back to my point on this. Yes, it's important to have your liaison contacts and your local, state, and federal authorities, but if you're running a corporate security team or a protection team, you better be threat hunting as it
Well, and
pertains to your
talking to your
patch.
yeah, and talking to your peers and talking your slice, and where do you fit in the industry? Are you telecom? Are you marketing? Are you manufacturing? And talking broadly in your sector too, like what are people hearing? Because you're absolutely right. I mean, before we kind of move on to that, I'm curious, like from either one of you, what about the idea that the assassin was inspired by Kaczynski and the Unabomber connection?
Well, I mean, we know again through research that they typically go back and look at what others have done. And so that inspiration is there, which, to Fred's point, you know, is this guy going to be an inspiration to others? And the answer is most likely yes. They're going to look to see what he did, how it was carried out. One of the points that I think is really critical when we're looking at situations like this is the target themselves. This, from everything that I've read, this was not specifically directed at the target. It was directed at an organization. It was directed at a CEO. There was, this person was unaffiliated with the organization. One of the things that people have a hard time wrapping their head around, they want it to be specific. They want it to be an affiliated person. They those are in the threat acting or the threat hunting world. Sometimes I think we hunt too narrowly. And as you said, Chuck, speaking to your peers, talking to people in your industry, hey, what's going on in general? In general, is this specific industry being targeted? Okay, well, they may not be mentioning my company, they may not be mentioning my CEO, but that does still affect me, and I need to be aware of it.
Hey, we'll get back to the conversation in just a moment. But first, in the world of safety, security, and protection, we know that gathering and sharing information is crucial. That's why we created the Ontic Resource Center as a hub for security strategies, best practices, and tools and tips to do your job more efficiently. Take a look at the articles, checklists, guides, industry frameworks, and more. Check out the link in the episode description to visit Ontic Resources or go to ontic.co/resources. Cindy, I think you're onto something there too. I mean, I'm an old information operations guy. There's probably somewhere on here is a coin or a flag or something from my unit, but I think about the we would call it the cognitive domain, the narrative. What is the narrative about our sector? What is the narrative about our company? What is the narrative about the place our company sits? Is it generally positive? Is it generally negative? Because I think you're absolutely right. There's a bit of there's clearly a bit of an opportunity that have presented itself, unfortunately, that led to these tragic events in New York. But I think you're absolutely right, and especially when it comes to like we're narrow, like we're looking for a needle when in fact we just need to broadly look and see
Yeah, I
what
think that's a
see
good
what's
way to
there.
put it. That's a really good way to put it.
Fred, I see you shifting. What are you going to add to this?
No, I agree wholeheartedly with both of you when it comes to this. I think that you have to be worried about. I mean, I've long given up on the idea that someone's going to knock on my door and say, hey, Fred, you've been threatened or your company's been threatened. You need to find it first. You need to be looking for it in some capacity and then assessing where you might fit in the overall threat assessment kind of stream of what could be coming down the pike to evaluate that. So I think we at times do have a tendency to say, well, someone will let us know, right? Well, not really.
I think there's a bit of an assumption sometimes that, oh, it's if it's going to happen, they'll let us know. But think about, we jokingly opened the podcast about the dumpster fire of 2025 that resembles 2024, that resemble 2023. So if you think about overwork and overwhelmed intelligence, law enforcement, safety services from the government, like I'm waiting for them to come tell me. I think statistically, I think you're right, Fred. No one is coming, not because they don't care, just because maybe they're overwhelmed. So it's up to me. It's up to me and my organization to take some control over that risk monitoring.
Yeah,
Um,
the chances are you're not part of that national intelligence collections stream. Regardless of what you might think, Colonel Randolph.
huh, yeah, I know I'm not. Cindy might be though. Cindy, let me ask you a question that Fred and I have talked about this. I think I talked to Jonathan Wackrow about this on the podcast a few weeks back. And I've got this. I know, Fred, you've got this. I know you've had this too, Cindy. Like somebody calls up and says, "Hey, my boss wants to talk to me because the question is post United Healthcare issue, like, are we good and what do you need?" So let me put you in the place of that corporate EP leader. I have a program, maybe it's big, maybe it's small, let's just say medium size. The CEO calls up and says, "What do you need?" And, it's people like default, like, I need more people, I need this. Reality is we don't know. But I mean, how would you answer that? Or how would you counsel somebody to think about answering that question, I guess?
It's it's kind of a
This is why
loaded
you don't
question.
like to come on podcasts with me.
Yeah. It's a loaded question, both from you and from from the CEO or whoever is asking.
It
No,
kind of is.
it it it's one of those things where, when you say, "Are we good?" Um, we're
Are
working
we?
on it.
Yeah. Are we?
That's that's the answer. Um, no, it's like we're assessing what we have. We're gonna have a thorough assessment of what we have and where we need to be, and we're gonna get back to you on the game plan. And I think I always like, especially when you're talking to, whether it's a protectee or whether it's the person who is handling the purse strings or whatever, is, honesty is always best. And say, this is, we can't sit here and say, the day after or the week after, as everybody's reacting, and say, yeah, we're great, and give everyone a false sense of security. It's like, in light of what we're learning, we're going to go back and we're going to reassess, and we're going to take a look at things, and then we're going to come to you and lay out the game plan for you
I
and
think,
let you know what we need.
yeah, by the way, I think there's some leadership gold in there to go and be willing to say, I don't know, I'll find out and I'll come back to you, as opposed to I need 25 more guards and everyone should be armed, or I need a helicopter and 15 feet of coax cable. I think the idea would be more like you said, like we're assessing. So what do I need right now? I need the ability to conduct a proper assessment, whether that's us internally, whether that's we hire an outside firm to do it, whatever that is, so we can understand the true risk we're facing to us, as we've talked about our industry. And then I'll come back and tell you how we need to fill these gaps, because as always, we want a risk-based approach. So
And Chuck and Cindy, I flash back when you asked that question because I can't tell you the number of billionaires and CEOs that I've talked to that at the end of the conversation or at the beginning of the conversation, tell me what I need to protect my building or my family or myself. And my response is always, I have no idea.
I don't know
And
what I
it
don't
gets
know, so we
I
need to
I
find
get
out.
this quiz, yeah, I get this quizzical look from these folks. And you say, look, it's going to take a little bit of time to put together a proper threat assessment and research. And, quite frankly, I don't know who hates you until we conduct a little bit of research into this, unless you know, and you could share that with me at this moment in time.
Yeah, well, that's
And
always a good one too. What is it that you're not telling me is what I need.
right.
Part of what I need to know.
Yeah. And why do you want to do this to yourself is also
Yeah,
a good question to ask.
yeah. And I, I also like there's a flip side of that coin too, where people are like, no, we're good here. It wasn't us. It doesn't affect us. We're all good. I don't need anything. I mean, I'm not sure that's a good way to start either. I think, I kind of go back to what you said. So you're like, I'm not sure, but I'm going to come back and we're going to let you know. I mean, anything else to add?
Exactly what you just said, though, is like, when something like this happens, even though it didn't happen to us, it didn't happen to me, I need to take a look at it and say, okay, what if that is us? And then again, run these scenarios, run these tabletops. If organizations are not looking at these as opportunities to get better, then they're doing something wrong. They should sit there and say, okay, guys and girls, this wasn't us yesterday. It could be us tomorrow. What are we going to do?
Well,
How do
and
we react?
yeah, and it kind of there's that growing like we've talked about this on the podcast before, I think, but that right after the event, Chicago PD issued an alert like, hey, it was like I think 3 buildings had "Kill Your CEO" on them. We saw the poster come out, the posters in New York City, those apparently high value target playing cards. So I mean, it's not us and it doesn't affect us. I'm kind of like I want to call BS on that and say you absolutely don't know. I mean, because again, I go back to this the narrative, like we're an extremist organization or we're activists, and now we want to pile onto this because what's happening here is inspiring me, and inspiring me, I want to inspire my movement. And if this young man said the way to get attention is to pull off a tragic assassination, I want to do the same thing. So are we safe? Go back to, yeah, we don't know. We're
Yeah,
going to find out.
and to make sure that it's not too narrow, and again, what they're looking at when they're doing the threat hunting is, you know this could be somebody who's just inspired and has no affiliation with any organization or any extremism, extremist group. They're just like, hey, this looked good. Let me go see if I can do this. And just be inspired by, and we see that so many times. It's just somebody looking for a way to do something.
Yeah. Speaking of inspired, and we didn't plan this, but I appreciate that segue. I mean, let's turn to the terrible events in New Orleans that we just went through. I mean, I actually had family down there, and thankfully they were all fine. But our hearts go out to those people who were tragically affected. I mean, Fred, I know there's conversations that the assailant may or may not have been inspired by terrorist activity, and I think there was a moment when, like, hey, we haven't seen anything from terrorism. It doesn't exist anymore. Yay. But I think everybody on this call, and probably most people watching or listening in, know that it never really goes away. It just goes quiet. Um, what do you think? What are your thoughts about the initial assessments from the NOLA incident?
Well, Chuck, I think there's certainly brilliance in simplicity. I think we tend to want to try to overcomplicate these kinds of attacks at times, and you know, obviously he was allegedly inspired by ISIS to some degree. The use of a vehicle to get out a random incident is, we've seen that before, and we'll continue to see that again because it's unless you have national resources to freeze a street, it's going to be very difficult for local and state law enforcement and the private sector across the country to put down every barrier you could possibly think of just to stop someone from driving into an event. And we learned this lesson hard in the 80s with vehicle-borne attacks on all of our embassies overseas, and companies will never be able to protect themselves like that, to be blunt, nor would they want to. So this might give rise to, a new special event management, you know, focus at all these events. And that might create, new positions in our industry as well, just for folks to specialize just in that.
Well, I think we have event security teams. I think many of them are unsung heroes. Many of them do not get the accolades they should. And I'm going to go on record right now to say everyone who has an event security team should relabel it event risk management. Purposeful words. Cindy, let me ask you kind of a pointed question. If you can't discuss it, that's fine. But if you were back at the NSC and things like this were happening, I mean, what would be going on? What would be the vibe, and how would people be thinking of, like, forward looking after this event?
I think you hit the nail on the head. It would be forward looking. It's what else is going on out there? What else are we picking up? And what else can we anticipate? Where are the hotbed issues and areas, and what else can we anticipate? It's always that preparation piece. It's always looking at things, and no one is able to predict, but based on information, based on intelligence that's coming in, which is information, we can try to anticipate.
Well, and I think everything you just said is translatable to the corporate side or to an organization. Well, maybe you're a nonprofit, maybe you're an NGO, but all of that could be translated to the corporate side. Look, what just happened? Okay, we've got it. It's terrible. Let's suspend that for a minute and tell me what's happening 30, 60, 90. So don't talk to me, prepare this now, but walk me through what we're doing immediately to make sure that we're looking, monitoring, securing these events. I mean, that's kind of what I take from it.
Yeah, and I think it's developing those listening skills to, and sort of more the understanding of what's going on around what just happened,
Mhm,
and not
mhm.
not being like laser focused on the individual who carried out the act. I mean, those things are all being done, but when you're looking at that, looking forward, you've got to start taking in more of that, those, like, the sort of the outer rings. What else is going on? And that may give us some intel to be able to, to anticipate.
And just so everybody kind of like listening in and watching it, we're not suggesting you ignore what's happening in the moment. That's, of course, that is something we need to understand and develop. But there's almost a bit of a discipline where you're like, okay, this is happening, Fred. I need to slice you off, and I need you to be forward looking. Everyone is looking right here. Honestly, you can learn what you can learn from executive protection too. The things going on here, I need you to always be forward looking. Like we're focused here. What's the next movement? What's the next thing? Somebody's got to be focused on that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've spent the probably the better part of the last couple weeks just in meetings and this and that, and the let's face it, the whole focus of the conversations have been uh, you know New Orleans and the CEO killing in New York City, and everybody in our industry is talking about it. Everybody literally is talking about it.
What I mean, I don't want to like miss the bit of like the terrorism or the inspired terror acts, if you will, as the information unfolds around the New Orleans incident, Fred. I mean, how as the chief historian of this triumvirate, how should our audience be thinking forward about this? Like past this prologue, what should we be thinking about?
Well, when these incidents happen, I think none of us are really surprised because we've seen a variant of this or an exact model of this in the past before. And you can just pick your nation and your year and pretty much find similar events that occur. And I'm always surprised how we all sit around and say, well, how in the heck could this have happened? Well, in reality, we all know how it happens at times. And it's very difficult to get in front of some of these threats for a range of different issues. And especially in the public safety kind of arena with so many soft targets around our great nation that it's damn near impossible to protect them all. And I always went into these investigations, whether it was plane crashes or hijackings or assassinations of our people overseas, what was known about this threat actor 72 hours prior. And I still have yet to see a good timeline of that. Now, maybe the FBI has put that together by now, but was he known to the JTTF in New Orleans? I don't know the answer to that question. And if so, what was done ahead of time? So, but I used to attack those kinds of issues, the same way, just from a timeline perspective. And I would like to know too, how long this operation had been put into play. Meaning, we know that he used the Meta glasses to do some degree of pre-operational surveillance, but
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting as all that comes out to understand like how technology was used from the from the assailant's point of view.
correct.
Cindy, let me ask you a question. I realize as we start thinking about wrapping up, we've been talking about a lot of just terrible things, and it's easy for populations and groups to oversteer and get paranoid. I mean, how do we create, as our resident threat management expert, everybody gets a title. Um, how do we create vigilance without paranoia? Like, how do we go talk to our executives and say, I want to be even keeled, and I want to create a culture that is overlooking an organization, but not selling on fear.
Information and honesty. I honestly, I think it's very low, you know, low tech when it comes to, you use technology to gather information, and then you speak to it and speak the truth about it, and that's the best way to make sure that people, I go back to something that's very basic. I think when you have children and children feel secure, they behave much better. And it's the same thing when we're adults. When we feel secure in a way that we know that people are taking care of things, we behave better, which means we can work better, we can work more freely, we can go about our business without always being worried. And I think that that's critical in organizations, that our people know that we have leaders that are taking care of things, but they're also communicating what's going on. When people feel they're left in the dark, when they don't know what's going on, or their fears aren't being heard, then that's when you start to get that behavior of, just kind of paranoia.
Hey, as we close, we always ask the guests, and you all have done it too, like a one question, but I realize like this is an opportunity for me to ask both of you, like Fred, what does connected intelligence mean to you?
Protective intelligence.
I'm down. I like what you're putting down there. Cindy, what about you? Connected intelligence.
It's the same thing. I was going to actually say when Fred was talking about, he was mentioning earlier about information about what was known about these people before they act. It's like we've got to connect. We've got to have that connected intelligence because there's little bits and pieces out there all over that need to be connected. It's protective intelligence.
It's vital when I think about it. I mean, it's vital. And if you're not doing it, you need to get around it. And I absolutely agree with both of you. Cindy Marble, Fred Burton, thank you both for taking time. I was going to say thanks for being on the Connected Intelligence podcast, but we're all hosts and we're all onticians. So thanks for taking time out to have this roundtable and help us kind of unpack as a group what we're seeing. And I know I'll see you both, but happy New Year. And here's to the best of 2025.
Thanks, Chuck. Thanks, Cindy.
Thanks for listening in. To find more episodes, visit us at ontic.co/podcasts. Don't forget to rate and subscribe on your streaming platform of choice. Know someone who would be a great guest or have questions you'd like us to answer? Email us at podcast@ontic.co. This episode was produced by the mighty AJ McKeon. This is Chuck Randolph. Until next time.